Okay, here we go. Welcome everybody listening to the Enter as Strangers podcast. We're going to get right to it today. Today we have our mom in, and we're going to ask her to tell us a little bit about our grandfather, her dad, and of course, Eric probably barely remembers or doesn't remember him
Nope.
at all.
He passed before I was born, so
Right.
this is a story I'm really interested in.
Yeah, and I remember him obviously because I was a little bit older, and I mentioned in I think the last podcast that kind of my love of rock hounding came from him taking me out into a field and looking for things and
Planting fake rocks
Yeah.
for you, you
Yeah.
think now?
yeah. He might have planted those rocks. Now that I think back, he might have been planting those stones out there. Anyway, so we have our mom on, Alice Spencer, and we kind of like to start the podcast in these kind of things with kind of giving our perspective of, the story that we're going to talk about. And obviously this one's going to be a little bit more probably vast in its nature. But then we like to have you come in and tell us about, your specific perspective of the story. So I will kind of start by saying that Grandpa died when I was pretty young, and we'll get into how he died a little bit later here. But like I mentioned before, he used to take me out into a field in kind of the back area behind the house that my mom grew up in, and we'd go hunt for polished rocks. That's what we called them, which were just kind of agates that were polished up and all smooth and everything like that. So I kind of got my love of rock hounding from him and whatnot. So I think that when I was growing up, I don't have a ton of memories of him that I can really recall other than rock hounding. I think everything else is probably a story, and he was a bit of a collector. He had in my recollection, it was quite a big kind of outbuilding that was on the property where he collected things like bottles. All I remember really is the bottles. I'm sure he collected all kinds of junk. So he's a little bit of a collector. But I didn't find this out until I was an adult, and I did not know this, but he was technically an orphan for a while.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So tell us what you know about, and by the way, our grandfather's name was Gus Patrick. Both his parents immigrated from Greece?
No, just his father.
Just his dad?
Correct.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about what you know about him was he born here
Yes.
in the States? So he was born here in the States. And what happened that kind of led him and his brother, I believe, right, to be in an orphanage?
Brother and sister.
Brother and sister, yeah.
His dad came over from Greece. I believe my dad's the second oldest,
Mm-hmm.
and his father died when he was 5 days old of pneumonia.
Okay.
Wow.
And because of that, my grandma, who I've never met, she had 3 children that she had to provide for. And at one point, they lived in an orphanage while she went and worked.
And was this back east?
Yeah, Pennsylvania.
So when he came, he immigrated with his parents then?
My grandfather.
So
Ju-
your
just
grandfather,
Just his dad?
I believe so. I don't know
his
that.
dad and his mom?
I only have record of his dad.
Okay. But you're saying that the kids went to stay with their grandparents, his grandmother. Is that what you said?
No,
Who had to take care of them?
they went to an orphanage.
No,
Well,
okay.
who worked? You said
Well, yeah,
My
she
grandmother.
Okay, so she did come
So
with them.
No. My grandfather came from Greece and met
Somebody.
my grandmother.
Okay.
They got married and had the 3
Gotcha.
kids.
Oh, gotcha.
Sorry,
Gotcha. So his mom was around.
yeah,
Okay. And so while she worked, they had to stay in an orphanage
correct.
for, do you know how long?
I don't.
Okay. Well, that's pretty interesting because I didn't know that.
Me either.
So they live in an orphanage in Pennsylvania. Do you know how old he was?
I think he was about 5 or 6. And I think from what I've been told, like they would go be with her on the weekends and then
Okay.
go back to the orphanage during the week.
Sounds like a sweet deal.
Yeah, no kidding.
Get rid of your kids for the week, and then they come home on the weekend.
Yeah.
I don't think it was a sweet
Well,
deal.
probably not, especially back then.
Yeah.
So the reason we're kind of going over some of this kind of old backstory is because, at least in my opinion, Grandpa had kind of a pretty interesting life, especially once they moved to Arizona. Now, do you know, did they come straight to Arizona when they did move, or did they live in other places along the way before they ended up in Arizona?
My father, as far back as I know, that's where he grew up, was in Pennsylvania,
Okay,
Pittsburgh.
right.
And he joined the military,
Which branch?
Army.
Army.
Hmm.
Okay.
And somehow he had cousins in California, and he ended up out there with the cousins. And that's how him and my mom met,
Okay. Is in California.
is in California.
In Southern California.
Correct.
And then they met and at some point got married and moved to Arizona.
When I was 9, 10, we moved to Prescott because
Okay.
my brother had asthma.
Right.
And we kept seeing commercials on the TV for the clear blue skies of Arizona.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So were they similar to the ads you see now for places
Yeah.
that are like, come
Yeah,
visit?
yeah.
They were tourism
Yeah,
ads.
kind of. Yeah.
So you guys moved from Southern California to Prescott.
Correct.
So for people listening that don't know, Prescott, especially at the time, and still is to a certain degree, is a small, more or less mountain town, I would call it,
Correct.
because it's basically in the mountains.
Yes.
So it's not desert like Phoenix.
No, it's like 100 miles north.
Right.
Of
And it's
Phoenix.
about 5,000 feet ish.
Correct. Mile
So
high.
It's a mile high.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys moved. So tell us a little bit about. Did you guys move right into the house on Gurley Street?
We did. Yep.
So we'll probably refer to this house multiple times as the Gurley Street house. And Prescott being a small town, this house was an old Victorian style home,
Correct.
and Gurley Street was one of the main streets that went through Prescott. And I think at some point, was the house registered on some sort of historical society?
I don't know that for sure.
Okay.
But the house did belong at one time to the man who owned and built the Palace Bar.
What's the significance of the Palace Bar?
Was Whiskey Row.
Oh, Whiskey Row.
Hmm.
So that's another claim to fame of Prescott, is Whiskey Row, which
Correct.
is a basically city block of bars, if not more, around the courthouse downtown.
That's correct.
So did he buy it from him?
No. My parents rented the house from the people who invented the glass part of a coffee maker.
Oh,
The
really?
caffrey,
Yeah.
The actual jug?
the actual jug. Hmm.
Someone invented that?
It was called the Corey coffee pot.
Oh, so that was their home.
That was their home.
Okay. So, and this was like, growing up, just for the kind of anecdotal story of it, which Eric doesn't remember, and I'm sure my memory is off, and a lot of it's probably based on pictures. But this was a multi-story home no, it wasn't multiple stories?
No.
Are you sure?
Just had an attic.
I
right?
lived there my whole life.
Okay, it wasn't a multi-story home, but it was very Victorian-esque.
There was a front door
Right.
and a very small entry. And there were 3 doors there. One led to a bedroom, one led to what would have been a parlor,
Right.
and then one led into the main living room of the home.
But we're talking a wood-burning stove
Correct.
that was in the kitchen, right?
In the kitchen.
And I remember it had glass doorknobs on all the doors. Am I right on that?
Hmm.
So, it was an old home, and I think it was also somewhat, or became somewhat it was a very iconic looking house.
It was.
And it was, I think became, and I could be wrong, but because I've seen a newspaper article. In fact,
Correct.
I have it framed in the house. But it became iconic in the city. The house
Correct.
did.
Well, my dad collected old bottles.
Right.
And he displayed them in the front. There were bay windows in the house. And he displayed those in the front of the window.
Right.
He made shelves that fit the window and
Right.
displayed the bottles. And he also hung a massive American flag from the front porch.
So tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up, because you have 3 brothers
Correct.
and you are the second oldest,
Correct.
and then you have 2 younger brothers and 1 older brother. Tell us what it was like growing up with Grandpa, because I've heard some stories. So what kind of father was he?
Well, he was a great dad. You know, I mean, for me.
Right.
My brothers will tell you a different story. But he was embarrassing. Like he would, if there was an issue at school, he'd stomp down to the school and, you know, talk to the principal and make sure everything was the way it should be. And, you know, we would die of embarrassment. And, you know.
Wasn't shy about voicing his
No,
opinion at
not
all.
one bit.
Did he have a temper?
Heck yeah. Not, there again, my brothers could tell you different stories than I could. He was once when I was like 17, I was bad mouthing my mom, and he was just happened to be walking past the chair I was sitting in, and he just backhanded me. That's the only time I did get spanked as a child.
Sure.
You know.
Right.
But he could completely lose his temper with my brothers. To the point of, as you look back, you would have said it bordered on.
Oh yeah, nowadays you'd be in prison for a while.
It would have bordered on abuse. I mean, his mode of discipline was a razor strap, and that's 2
Wow.
4-inch
Pieces of leather
hung together,
Right.
and it hung on the wall in the kitchen. And I mean,
So he was a disciplinarian.
yeah, and it definitely left welts.
Right. Right. But your brothers caught the
My
brunt of
brothers
that.
caught the brunt of that.
Just because they were boys.
I think so.
So when he served in the Korean War too, right?
He
Your dad?
served in the Korean War and World War II.
So he was in both wars.
Correct.
In the Army.
Hmm.
So do you think? So it sounds like you were a daddy's girl.
Yeah, I guess so.
I mean, he treated you differently.
Yeah.
Did he treat you? Did the like disciplinarian not come out on you, or did he actually treat you a little better because you were the only girl?
Yeah, I think he was still a disciplinarian, but he was more soft with me than
Right.
he was with my brothers.
Do you think? So Grandma didn't know him before the war.
No.
She didn't know him at all.
No.
So there's not really anyone that you could have spoken to in your life that would have a perspective of him before going to World War II and then going into the Korean War.
No. I mean, I never even met his sister and brother till, you know, I was young.
Right.
And my aunt and her husband came out to visit us one summer.
Mm-hmm.
And I never even met my uncle until Dad passed away.
Wow.
So was he just not close with his brother and sister?
Well, they lived back east, you know,
Right.
and I just think in those times,
He just, yeah.
they probably talked on the phone and whatnot,
Right.
but you just didn't
Right.
do all that traveling. Couldn't afford to. Well, we couldn't, you know.
So I heard a story once that is probably inaccurate. I'm going to say it wrong, but I want you to tell the story. Something about I wouldn't say scuffle, but a disagreement in the kitchen, something that involved a knife or a fork.
I heard this, I think, with a newspaper.
Or a cereal box.
Cereal box.
Swatting it down or something.
No.
So tell us the story.
I don't remember what the whole discussion was about, but my dad was at one end of the table and I was at the other, and I'm sure my brothers were around, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad got mad at something I did or said or whatever, and he threw a butter knife at me, and it pierced that cereal box before it got to me, thankfully.
It got through the cereal box?
It got through the cereal box.
So this is what I'm talking about. It sounds like Grandpa might have been some sort of knife assassin
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
war
Well, the butter
to
knife
throw a butter
nonetheless.
knife through
No
a
kidding.
box.
It's impressive.
So, okay. So that is a story I heard. I couldn't remember if it was who the knife was
Yeah,
thrown
it
at
was
or
me.
whatever.
Yeah.
Like I said, I have really vague recollections of Grandpa. I remember though that I was I think, scared of him. I remember that a little bit
Really?
of him being like, just like,
Being intimidated.
Yeah.
of
Well,
was-
that's funny because he idolized you.
yeah,
I remember when you were little and we were over there for some reason and you were laying on a bed. You were a
Mhm.
little baby.
right.
And I caught him in the room. He was kneeling next to the bed,
Uh huh.
just staring at you.
Really?
Mhm.
Yeah. Well,
Well, you were the first grandchild.
right. Right. That's why I'm the favorite, dude. Okay.
bullshit, really. I'm the youngest.
I'm the first grandchild on both sides. Yeah, well, I remember, like I said, he used to take me out into that shop or into that big blue building.
It wasn't blue. It, was
wasn't blue.
brick.
It was
It
brick.
was brick, but it had old,
Memories.
like automotive signs on it.
Yeah,
And it didn't have a roof. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. It was just trusses and stuff up there, right?
Yeah.
That place, in my recollection, would have been like an American Picker's Paradise.
Oh,
Yeah, that's where your
completely.
obsession came from there.
Yeah. No, that's completely true.
Yeah. Yeah. That old rustic.
Yep.
I remember spending a lot of time in there, and I remember spending a lot of time in the field. And the reason we joked about him planting those rocks is because now knowing what I know about geology and the kind of stones, at least in my memory, which I'm proving to be a little bit flawed here, you don't find stones like that.
You know what? We used to go out there and find obsidian, polished obsidian.
Apache tears and stuff like
Right,
that, and a
right.
lot of agate that was really
Correct.
polished. But it seemed almost too polished. It must have been a special spot because I've never seen stone
Well,
that
I
naturally
guess maybe
polished.
he could have thrown some out there, but I'm just telling you, as a kid, we used to go out there and pick
Find
up
it too.
the Apache tears
Yeah.
and stuff out there.
Yeah. So growing up with Grandpa, like you said, it sounded like he treated you pretty good, and he wasn't afraid to embarrass you.
Well, it was always, entertaining.
Right.
I mean, when you're young, you don't
See it that way.
you don't see it that
Yeah.
way.
Right.
And my friends would come over. I can remember one friend in particular, and she wore a pair of glasses, and they were always sliding down the bridge of her nose. And
Uh-huh.
my dad would always walk up to her and push those glasses back up on her.
Were your friends afraid of him at all?
I think they were. I
Yeah.
mean, because he had that sense of humor where you didn't know if he was kidding or if he
Right.
was serious. And at our house on Saturdays, that was cleaning day.
Every Saturday.
Every Saturday.
Well, this explains a lot.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I get it from. See, it's genetic. So
It is genetic.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's better
Yeah.
that than the opposite.
buzz off, Tisha.
Hey.
So if the friends spent the night, which I honestly didn't have a ton of friends, and so not till I got a little older.
Right.
And they weren't allowed, if they spent the night, they were allowed to spend the night, but if they stayed, they had to participate in the cleaning of the next day, whatever that was, outside, inside, whatever it was.
So,
And he was a drill sergeant.
Oh, yeah, that's the military guy in him,
Yeah, oh,
for sure.
definitely.
well,
And OCD probably because of it.
A little bit, yeah.
was he a drill sergeant? Do you know what rank
no,
he had?
he was a sergeant.
He was a
Not
sergeant.
a drill sergeant. I'm just saying he was
Right.
a drill sergeant at home.
with you
Yeah.
guys. But what's interesting about that, I mean, you hear it all the time, that generation is, in fact, a UFC fighter, Special Forces guy, Tim Kennedy, said it once on a podcast I heard. He said, hard times make tough men, and tough men make soft times, and soft times make soft men. And those were hard men back then.
Yeah,
in
I would agree
the
with
World
that.
War II. And
Mhm.
so I think that, was he approachable?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So you could come to him
Yeah.
and ask him for stuff or
Yeah.
or whatever.
I mean, my experience
Right.
as a child, I mean, my relationship was better with him than with my mom. He was, for me, more approachable than my mother was.
Right.
Hmm.
You think it was opposite for your brothers? Was grandma more approachable to them,
Oh,
you think, than
sure.
than grandpa?
Definitely.
Yeah.
She was definitely geared towards the boys.
Right. Right. Well, so I know at some point, like, how old were you when grandpa got involved in kind of being fairly, because he was a fairly patriotic individual,
Oh, my whole life he was.
obviously serving in 2 wars,
Hmm.
was real patriotic. that I remember the big flag because it hung above the banister,
Oh, it was
right?
every bit as big as that one that flies down there on Colonial Flag, you
Right.
know,
Wow.
or over by the
huge
mall.
flag.
Yeah.
That was wasn't on a pole.
No.
It hung from the
House itself.
house
right?
itself.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
So at some point he got involved in being on the city council, right?
Correct.
So before we get there, and I don't know if this is during that time, I kind of want to get a bigger sense, I think, because we talked a little bit about this, and we've heard stories over the years. And I have a book you gave me that's kind of filled with newspaper clippings of him. Now, again, keeping in mind that Prescott's a real small town at the time. And so tell a story. You told me one time about what he would do, that he would so I'll just kind of start, or at least I think you told me that you used to just carry garbage bags in the car, right?
Brown paper sacks.
Or brown paper sacks. And what would he do with those brown paper sacks?
Oh, if we've seen trash on the side of the road, he'd pull over and we'd collect trash.
So how regular of a thing was that?
Oh,
Just
all the time.
all the time,
Yeah.
anywhere?
Anywhere. And up and down our street. We had to go up and down our street weekly and pick up the trash that was out in front.
So why was he making you pick up trash?
You know, probably twofold, to actually pick up the trash and
Right.
probably to develop character.
So do you but how much of that picking up trash do you think was pride in just
Oh,
keeping a clean town?
100%.
Right. So that's kind of what I'm getting at is how much pride did he take or care did he take in the city of Prescott?
Oh, 100%.
So he was making you guys clean up trash and stuff like that, and he was
Oh, he was trying to teach us to have a love for our community as well,
right.
you know.
Are there any other kind of crazy stories that kind of stand out to you about him when you were a kid?
When I got into high school, okay, the elementary school you could see from our back porch.
Right.
So, you know, and the junior high was within walking distance, but when I got into high school, it was probably 3.5, 4 miles to school from our house.
Mm-hmm.
Uphill both ways
Yeah.
in the snow.
5 feet of snow.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we were made to walk unless the temperature was below freezing. The temperature was below freezing, we could go over to the elementary school and catch a bus.
Right.
And he would go over to the school and see if he could catch us getting on the bus when it was warmer.
Did he ever catch you getting on the bus?
Oh, of course.
So he wouldn't let you take the bus.
Nope.
And why? Just to toughen you guys
Yeah,
up?
to toughen us up. And I remember when I was in elementary school, this comes into the cleaning thing. We were to make our bed before we left for school. And if we didn't do it, which was more my brother's stuff than mine, he'd go to the school, check you out of school, bring you home, make you make your bed, do whatever it was you didn't do, and then take you back to school.
Wow. That's crazy.
That is crazy.
You know, it's funny now, but
Right.
it wasn't then. But
course
I don't recall ever having to go home because
Right.
I just did it.
Right. So why do you think, and this of course will just be your opinion because you probably don't really know, why do you think he was that way?
Well, I think he was a product of his growing up and whatever transpired through being in an orphanage and going into the military, and maybe it was just his way of, you know, trying to make us better citizens, better people, and also in a way to control his own environment, you know.
Do you think that was he so like Eric and I could probably easily consider you a neat freak because we grew up
Really?
and you had your certain cleaning days and things like that, and if a piece of paper sat somewhere more than 20 seconds it got thrown away regardless of what kind of piece of paper it was. So do you think he was like that because of it was an issue of, like you said, like you just mentioned, controlling his environment.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can to myself, I can relate that when I'm upset about something
Mhm.
or emotional about something or something's on my mind, the environment around me when it's neat, I just feel better in my head. It's kind of silly, but and I think that's probably how he was
Because they say
I could
that,
relate to that.
if
you
you
know,
stay organized.
yeah, a clean environment, clean mind.
Yeah,
well, and they say
and you
that,
could move on to the next thing if
Yeah.
yeah.
things around you are put in order.
Well, and I know that they say that when children are young and they don't have very much, they have very unstable environments and don't have a lot of control, they tend to, when they become adults, keep very organized and clean. They're not messy people.
Yeah,
You know.
I don't think that's true for me.
Right.
I think that we were
You came
taught
by it
to be
that way. Right.
cleanliness is next to godliness.
So,
You know,
why do you think he was? Do you think that, like, his childhood and all that? I mean, obviously, the answer is always yes, but do you have any insight into his junk collecting? You know, and the things he collected had to do with, you know, the way he grew up as well.
I don't know. I think probably, I guess,
Right.
because I know for myself, you know, I like to find treasures and stuff,
Right.
and there's something exhilarating and fun about that. And
Right.
I obviously got that from him.
But did he talk about being a kid?
No.
Did he talk about? He didn't talk about.
I don't ever remember him sharing memories of a kid other than being at the orphanage.
Right. So he did talk about being at the orphanage.
Yeah, vague
Just-
things. Yeah, the food they had, and
Right.
you know,
And so was he just 18 when he joined the military, as far as you know?
as far as I know, he was. Yeah,
Was he a high school graduate?
I couldn't honestly tell you. I want to say he was, but I don't know that for certain.
Right. So that's kind of interesting.
And did he live in that orphanage until he went to the military?
I don't think so.
Hmm.
I don't think so.
This is what's interesting, right? It's about, it seems like, and this is probably, it's probably more conducive of your generation to your parents' generation, but it doesn't seem like, and people I've talked to too, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of insight into your generation knowing about your parents'
Yeah,
generation.
I think that's probably true.
which is weird, because I mean, and it's probably the advent of technology and
Yeah,
all this stuff, and you know, social media that keeps us more informed
yeah.
nowadays. But
I mean, I think about my mom, and I'm sure she shared stories of going. They used to go on drives and stuff every Sunday, but beyond that, I don't recall that she ever shared childhood
right,
stories either.
right. But and so Grandpa, I mean, you classify as he grew up poor,
Oh, for sure.
and Grandma grew up a little less poor.
Oh, she grew up privileged, and in those days,
Right.
she grew up privileged.
Right. So I know on her side of the family there was some success in business, but did that come from her parents or from her brother built that company?
No, it came from her dad.
Her dad
And his brothers.
and his brothers,
Mhm.
and they were steel manufacturers,
Correct.
right?
hmm
And they put a lot of they supplied a lot of the steel for Disneyland,
Correct.
and so they came from privilege.
hmm
Your mom came from privilege.
hmm
And do you know how your parents met?
I actually believe they met at the Methodist Church at a youth group.
So was your dad religious?
I mean, no, not more so. We went to church every Sunday and
Methodist church.
Methodist Church.
You grew up Methodist.
Correct.
See, that's I didn't know that.
And
Yeah,
it
me
was, there was our house,
Right,
there was the house next door,
right.
there was the Methodist Church.
Is that the church Keith was married in?
No,
No. Was that a church?
no,
That may not have been a church.
no.
Okay. I was that little kid. I don't remember.
I was in the choir at that church.
Oh, okay. So tell us about, you met Dad when you were 18?
I met Dad on the last day of high school. and we were both seniors,
So you were 18-ish, somewhere in there.
roughly.
What was it like introducing Dad to Grandpa?
Oh, the very first time Dad came to the house to get me on a date,
Yeah.
my dad opened the door and said, "Son, are you afraid of the dark?" And Dad said no, and he said, "Well, get out in it."
Are you serious?
Mhm.
Was he joking?
Yeah.
But it didn't seem like a joke.
No,
What did Dad do?
I don't honestly remember. I probably interceded,
So was he pretty laid back with Dad, or did Dad have to win him over?
I think Dad probably had to win him over a little bit, but
Right.
I think he accepted him right from the start,
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then let's see. So, Grandpa was, trying to remember here. So, he grew up in an orphanage, or spent a lot of time in an orphanage. It was in 2 different wars in the Army. Became the rank of sergeant, and then met Grandma, moved to Prescott because your brother had asthma, right?
Correct.
And at what point, how old were you when he started getting involved in city politics?
Well, he ran for school board and stuff when I was young and was going to school, so he started some kind of politicalness,
Mm-hmm.
then. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure I was married.
Oh, when he got involved,
Mm-hmm. But I got married pretty young, so.
right? What
Yeah, I think so.
what do you? I mean, I didn't know that he ran for school board.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know why he did? I mean, you drive around town, and anytime there's whatever, you see all these so and so for school board
Right.
and all this stuff, and I always trip on people like that, going, "What possesses people
Yeah,
to
I don't-
want to
I
get
mean,
involved?"
Well, I think it's the same thing that possessed him to pick up trash around town. It was his community,
Correct.
and especially back in those days. That was kind of
It was really different back then.
Yeah, that
There
was kind of the
so much
mindset.
more involvement.
yeah.
But like, do you think it was like, oh, I need to get involved
Yeah,
because
I-
things need to change?
Yes, I think he wanted to help, and I think he thought that things needed to change.
And so that's what that you think maybe drove him.
Yeah.
Is that he wanted to change the status quo.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So at some point, we're kind of getting a backstory here, because what we're leading to is kind of the story of how my grandfather died, which is a unique thing, I would say. But at some point, he got on Prescott City Council.
Correct.
And I don't really know how city councils work. I don't know if is there a chairman of the council? Is there a lead of the council?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the mayor.
It was
The mayor is the head of the council. I mean, back then, I don't know how it really works today. I assume there's the mayor and then the council members.
Right. But all the council members are of equal playing field, as far as you know.
Yes, correct.
Okay. So he's on the city council.
Well, he'd probably attended council meetings for years
Just as a citizen.
just as a citizen. Yeah.
That's crazy. Crazy. So do you think, as we're going into this story, and he's getting more and more involved in the city of Prescott and in the politics of Prescott,
Mm-hmm.
Did you always consider your dad to be a fairly stable person?
Oh, for sure.
I mean,
For me,
right.
I never saw he's really a charismatic person. I mean, he was really compassionate and caring,
Mhm.
and he could be a jerk,
Was he a drinker at all?
No, just occasional.
Right, but he wasn't.
No. Mm-mm.
Did he smoke or anything like that?
Not that I recall.
While you were growing up, he didn't
Mm-mm,
smoke or anything
no.
like that. So he was really involved with city council. He would attend meetings and things like that.
Correct.
So he's very aware of what was going on in the town.
Yes.
Okay, so do you remember any stories about? I mean, because at this time, it sounds like by the time he gets and you get elected to city council.
Correct.
Okay, so are you out of the house by the time he gets elected to city
Yes.
council?
Yeah.
So you're out. You're married.
Mm-hmm.
You've moved out. And do you remember what that was like for him. Do you remember him running for election and stuff like that?
I do. Vaguely. I mean, I don't have big memories of it, but, it was really different back in those days, too,
Right.
you know.
But you weren't involved in any way?
No.
No putting up
No, I don't.
signs and posters or anything like that?
No, I don't remember that I did that.
Was he well liked within the city government?
Probably in the beginning.
Right. But,
I mean, he'd get on there, and I know you guys are too young for this, but there was a show on TV called The Honeymooners
yeah.
with Jackie Gleason and Art Carney. And
Right.
Art Carney worked in the sewer system, and my dad wanted to rename the sewer treatment plant in Prescott to Art Carney.
He did?
Art Carney sewer whatever,
Right. But just why?
Because he just thought it was, tongue-in-cheek sort of thing,
Right. But he legitimately
brought it to the council.
And they said no.
Mm-hmm.
It got voted down.
Yeah. Shocker.
Yeah.
So all in all, do you know how many years he was on the city council?
I want to say 4.
So just 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, that's a lot shorter than I thought. I mean, like you said, he was involved, in city at the meetings and stuff like that.
He was involved for years.
Did you have any kind of inclination? I would think maybe not, because new mom and stuff like that around this time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not new mom, but you had a few of us already,
yeah.
right? So, I mean, would you say he was pretty entrenched in the city politics?
Yeah.
And being on the council?
Yeah.
So, what year did he die? Was it 83?
82.
82.
I was 7 months pregnant with Eric.
So he died in 82, but you were born in 83.
82.
Oh, you were born in 82.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
just said I was 7 months
I know
pregnant.
that. Well, I swear Eric was born in 83. That's why I was trying to work the math backwards. So why don't you tell us, as best you know, the events leading up to his death, and then take us through that whole process, the whole story of that.
Okay.
So obviously there was frustration.
Yeah, apparently there
Did he voice that much throughout the years?
Well, he was not a member of the council
At the time.
when he died.
Right.
Okay, but he had continued. He lost his bid for re-election, and he had been he went to the meetings every time they had one.
So
right.
let's slow down a second. He lost his bid for re-election. Do you know anything about that? Do you know why he lost his bid for re-election?
Well, I think people started to see him as eccentric, and
Right.
that's only my opinion. I don't know, but that's my guess. Is people thought he was odd.
A little hard-headed, was he?
Yeah. Oh, definitely hard-headed. Yeah.
Now, he had pretty strong opinions about
Yes.
things.
Oh, for sure.
So he was voted out, or he did not win his re-election.
Correct.
But he continued to
He was
go to the
actively
meetings.
involved in going to the meetings and doing what he could do, and
Did
they would vote. When you go to a council meeting and there's a portion of the meetings that are public input, okay, anybody can get up in the public portion and say
Right.
if there's spill. And when he would do that, they would vote on whether what he said would go into the minutes of the meeting.
So they would at the
As
time,
far as like being recorded in the meeting?
Yes.
but not audio recordings.
Not audio
but
recordings.
the secretarial.
Yes.
Yeah. So
And
so why?
that's unconstitutional.
So why would they do that?
Why'd they have such an issue with him?
I just think they didn't like him. I just think it came to the point where he rubbed people wrong, and he used to wear a T-shirt that said #1 Maverick on it.
So
He just thought if something needed to be changed, it was just a simple thing to go and change it, and he fought for those kind of things. If he saw something that he thought was wrong, He'd fight for it.
So he was a politician without the political nature.
He
in
was
it.
he was an underdog, I think.
Yeah.
That's how I look at him. He was for the underdog is what I mean.
Right.
You know, he would fight for the
The little
everyday
guy.
person, you know, and try to make changes, you
Right.
know. And so I think that he rubbed people the wrong way, and I think that's why it came to that.
So the people just. So what do you know? I mean,
So he'd get up and say his spiel for the meeting or whatever, and then at the end of it they go, okay, are we going to accept that into today's record or not?
Correct.
Wow.
but what's the point? What's
That's
the point
ballsy.
of putting it in or not putting it in?
I
No
don't-
one even pays
Yeah.
attention to that
No,
shit.
I don't know. You look at
What's the point? There had to have been someone in that council or multiple someones that the point is to piss him off.
I'm sure. I mean, look at if I don't know if you know this, but you don't maybe follow. But we have recently had a councilman in Kaysville that much reminded me of Dad.
Right.
That
I know this guy.
yeah, yes you do, and you know he did similar things,
Yeah.
but his things were more for a grandiose adventure than from what my dad. But it was a similar sort of. He started rubbing people the wrong way and ticking them off.
Right.
He wasn't a politician in politics.
and they didn't like him
No.
because of that.
Yeah.
So
But Grandpa didn't care, right?
no.
He didn't care who.
Well, he said he didn't care.
Well, he didn't. But he wasn't. He wasn't going to pussyfoot around an issue,
No.
or he wasn't going to bow down to anyone
No.
if he didn't think it was the right
No.
thing.
No.
So okay, so we'll just kind of get to it here. We probably should have maybe mentioned it before, but your dad, our grandpa, committed suicide
Correct.
when I was 8,
6.
6, somewhere in that age. Okay, I was 6 years old, and I can remember getting the news. I remember how I heard the news, and we can talk about that in a minute. But the way in which he did this was very unique, and it obviously made, I would assume, statewide news.
Oh, I'm sure it made
nationwide news.
Yeah.
So tell us to the best of, you know, I know you weren't there, obviously, but you know, obviously it was a very public thing. And at this time, they started recording.
Audio recording?
They had audio recordings
So-
by then.
So in the city council.
Correct.
So I talked to your brother at one time,
Mm-hmm.
and he gave me the impression that they started to do audio recordings of, and I could be totally wrong on this, so tell me if this is right. They started to do audio recordings, and it had, what Keith felt was it had something to do with Grandpa.
I don't know that for sure. Could
Right.
be, you know.
So,
Keith probably has more knowledge of that type of
right.
information than I do.
So he's not on city council anymore.
Right.
Between not being on city council and his death, do you know how long a span that was?
I don't, but I don't think it was a real long time.
So it wasn't like 8 years had gone by.
No,
or
it
anything
was
like that.
probably within a year or so, a year and a half.
Okay, so tell us what happened. Tell us what he did and how he did it and what went down.
He put my mom and my little brother on an airplane to go to Utah to visit my brothers that lived here at the time.
So Uncle Herb was already here.
Uncle Herb and Keith were already here. And he put Gus
Right.
and my mom on the airplane to come visit.
Right.
That was on I believe a Saturday.
And we were living in Prescott Valley at the time.
And we were living in Prescott Valley, and he was supposed to come out to our house for dinner on, I believe their council meetings they were either on Monday night or Tuesday night. Okay, and so he was going to come out and have dinner with us the night before.
Okay. So just because this is for Eric and I, the details of a lot of this stuff, we may have heard at one time, but
Mhm.
not in this kind of format. So I'm kind of interested. Do you know when you say he put your grandma and Gus on a plane and sent him to Utah? Do you know if your mom was like,
No,
I
I
mean,
think it was just You know, there'd been a planned, talked about visit,
Right.
but I do think that he
knew what was going to happen.
He knew what he was doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, so he was supposed to come out for dinner.
Yeah, and I was sick or something, and he didn't come. And, you know, there's a part of me even to this day that questions if he'd come. Could I had said something that would have changed his mind? But
Right.
I had no clue that he was feeling this way.
You don't. Okay. So you don't. He wasn't depressed.
No.
This wasn't an issue of being depressed.
If he was, he hit it really, really well.
Not an issue of mental illness of
No.
any kind.
Well, that could probably be argued.
Yeah, that's probably debatable.
And we'll talk
there.
about that in a second. So
But-
continue.
So I didn't talk to him or see him after that day, you know. And on Monday after late, I think the council meetings were like during the afternoon, if I'm remembering.
On Mondays.
They weren't at night. They were not at night. And
But they were on Mondays.
they were on Mondays.
Okay.
Or Tuesdays. I'm pretty sure they were Mondays. And a lady from church came to the house in the afternoon and said, and the really weird thing was, I didn't really know this gal very well. She was my age.
Mm-hmm.
And that day I'd probably talked to her on the phone for a couple hours, just getting to know her. And she came to my house and said, I have to take you to the hospital. And I said, how come? And she said, well, something's happened to your dad. And I thought, okay, he had a medical issue or something,
Mhm.
right? And so my next door neighbor took you guys, you and Jenny and Jason,
Right.
and she took me to the hospital. And I knew that it was bad because she was taking me to the community hospital, not to the Veterans Hospital. And if my dad had been able to say, he would have said, take me to the Veterans Hospital.
Right.
So
But you knew that.
I did know that.
Okay.
And but I did have sense enough before I left the house, because this was before cell phones, you know.
Right.
I called, Dad was doing construction for a development, and I called the real estate office there,
Right.
the model home, and I told them to send Dad to the hospital. And Dad got in the truck to go to the hospital, and it was all over the news.
Okay. So what happened?
So Dad got up during the public portion of the council meeting, and it was June 27th, 1982. And he stood up and gave a speech, and he said, in the words of Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. And he put a .357 to his temple and shot himself.
And
Is that all he said? Or was he talking about something specific
No.
beforehand?
No, well, I don't.
so I've heard the tape.
Yeah, I have too, but it's been a while.
It's hard to understand, but you
Mhm.
can actually hear the gunshot
Mhm.
go off
Mhm.
on the tape. So why did he do that, in your estimation, in that capacity,
Well,
in that forum?
He etched the initials of the mayor and the council members that he blamed for his freedom of expression. And so I guess it was probably in some weird way his way to say,
It's a big FU.
yeah.
So
He etched him in the bullet.
in the
Yes,
case,
in the
in the
casing.
casing.
Hmm.
so
Yep.
there's a lot of questions that I have around this, and I'm just wondering because, like, the idea of this podcast is obviously to get to know people better and get the stories within the stories. So obviously this is premeditated. I had heard and again, this is probably just one of those things that somebody around my age said growing up, but I had heard that these were firearms that were in the council chambers. They
No.
would display firearms. They were not, right?
My dad, which I did not know, that was his gun. He owned a gun.
Okay, so he was a gun owner,
Just that gun.
just that gun,
Mhm.
and it was a .357.
Hmm.
And he survived the shot. And he lived for how many hours afterwards?
A few.
A few hours.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he felt that they were silencing him
Mm-hmm.
because they were at this point maybe at times filtering or omitting his
Censoring
censoring him from the minutes.
Mm-hmm.
He was probably looked at as, if we take the complete flip side of the coin, he was probably looked at as a problem citizen. He was the guy that was always causing problems, was probably always raising a stink.
Correct.
It sounds like he was not a fan of the mayor. The mayor was probably not a fan of him.
Correct.
At all.
Correct.
And so he arranged this coup de grace, so to speak, in front of the city council and probably in front of citizens as well.
Correct.
And did you ever? So let's, before we go into maybe some of the questions of why and how and all these details. So you're on your way to the hospital. This lady's taking you to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
You get there before Dad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
But
no.
Dad knew
No,
before
Dad
you.
Dad was there when I got
and he
there.
already knew.
He already
But you
knew.
did not know.
I did not know.
So how were you told? Did Dad tell you?
No. The doctor told me when they took me back because I was pregnant with Eric and they
Right.
were worried.
Right.
So they took me and Dad back to an emergency room, you
Right.
know, and they gave me the once over to make sure I was okay. And that doctor just happened to be a member of the church
Mhm.
we went to. So he knew me and Dad, but he didn't
Right.
know that was my dad because my name was different,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And he had to tell me. He said he shot himself, and I was in complete disbelief because
Okay, you didn't know he had shot himself at that council meeting.
no,
You just heard that he had shot himself.
yeah. And I mean, you know, slowly the pieces all
How old was he?
came in. 56.
At what point did Grandma get the news?
Obviously by this time, okay, Dad left me a note on the podium.
Of the city council chambers?
Correct.
Okay, that's news to me.
And one of the council members, Jack Stevens, was a friend of Dad's. We used to go Christmas tree cutting as kids with his family.
Mhm.
Nice man. He grabbed that note and he got it to me. They wanted it. They wanted to read it, look at it, see what it said.
It was a sealed note?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
They as in,
the
police?
The police, yeah.
right?
So I didn't give it back because, you know,
Right.
it was mine.
Right.
And so I was grateful for that. But, you know,
So
by this time, okay.
Let me ask you a question. So it's not like he had a note on there for your mom. Did he write your mom any note?
Yeah,
So did he write all the kids a note?
yeah.
He did,
He went from the post office
right?
to the city council.
So he mailed them out.
Correct.
But not yours?
Well, obviously,
No, because I was
she's the only
I
one
was
in
the
town.
only one that lived there.
Oh, correct.
Yeah.
So it just is strange to me that he would bring the note with him and have it on the podium.
I think he knew somebody would get it to me.
Yeah, it just seems like
That's
in the chaos
crazy.
of all that,
Yeah.
there could have been a good chance you never would have gotten that.
Could have been, but I did.
So
And so, anyway, like I said, obviously somehow the news spread quickly,
mhm.
and dear Opal Allen, who lived around the corner. I mean, they lived down around the corner for years and years from the time I was a little kid. And they were also members of the church
Mhm.
that we went to, and somehow she made a call. I don't, you know, it was such a blur.
Right.
But I think she actually came to the hospital, and somehow she had made the initial call to my family, to my brothers, to my mom. And then I had to get on the phone and
Right.
confirm.
Right. And that was probably, like you say, it was all kind of a blur.
Yeah.
Did you feel overwhelmed at the fact that you were the only one in town
Yeah, for sure.
at the time?
Yeah.
And
we went, and
so you got to the hospital and your dad was still alive.
yeah,
And could he speak?
they wouldn't let me see him.
They wouldn't let you see him.
Mm-mm.
So I always heard that you got to see him.
No, I got to see him in the morgue the next day.
But you did not get to.
No, I wanted to. I asked
Right.
to.
But you didn't get to speak to him.
No,
Do you know if he was speaking?
I don't think he was.
Right. So because he had lived he only survived a couple hours,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So he was so passionate or so hurt or whatever by his time in the city council and what they had done. Do you think this was more I'm going to show you to these personal individual people? Do you think this was, knowing your dad, do you think this was more of a like the seriousness of his freedom of speech being suppressed, that it was more a statement along those lines?
Yes.
Because one would argue that etching the initials into the casings is a fairly mentally unstable thing to do.
Oh, how could it not be?
Right. So that's where we go back to the question of, was he depressed? Did he suffer from any kind of mental instability?
Well, I mean, serving in 2 wars, there's got to be some PTSD
Oh,
in
I'm
there,
sure.
especially back in the day
We
when there
didn't
wasn't
recognize
Yeah.
those things,
wasn't
but
that kind of outlet.
he never, in my opinion, or what I saw, he'd come to the house. He was great with you guys.
Right.
He didn't outwardly show any signs of depression.
Right. Yeah. So just to give my perspective, and again, I was a little kid, but I remember at some point you had to have called Grandma
Oh, I did.
Spencer
Yeah.
and had her come to the house.
Yeah, of course. I don't know. I'm sure Dad called her.
Somebody called her.
Somebody called
Somehow
her.
Grandma Spencer came to the house.
Mhm.
I remember, it's all vague flashes, and of course, recalling it, every time you recall a memory, you're adding to that inaccuracy of that memory. But I remember being on the side of the house with Billy, and he said, "Your grandpa shot himself," and just being a little kid. And then I really don't have any other memory of that whole time frame besides that one moment
Mhm.
of him telling me that. And I do remember spending the night at Grandma and Grandpa's house quite a bit. It's funny because I was actually more scared of Grandma than I was of Grandpa, right? Because she was a little bit of a disciplinarian, it seemed to me too, growing up. And of course now, but a lot of that might be as I got older, I spent a lot of time at Grandma's and stuff like that.
Right.
But I can remember spending the night there multiple times at the house, and I said Grandpa used to take me out and rock hound with him and stuff like that. So he was, in contrast to Dad's dad, who was not around or was just this mean old guy.
Correct.
That or at least in my memory, he was just this mean old guy.
That's pretty correct.
Yeah. So, but he was fairly, he was, I would say probably, obviously, because I'm a rock nerd, and I don't know if he was a rock nerd or if he was just this, just loved to collect
Yeah.
stuff. But
he loved the rocks,
Right.
but he just loved to collect.
right. So it was fairly, I would say, formative for me.
Mhm.
I at least, as much as you can remember, felt fairly close to him.
Well, I definitely think that of all the kids, you have the connection with him.
Right. So, which, and this might be a topic for a later podcast, but that connection to him drove a passion of mine years and years later as an adult, which has its own interesting stories that maybe one day we'll go into, and some pretty unique coincidences that happened around Grandpa. But so that's my perspective of that. Obviously, Eric wasn't born yet. Eric, do you have, obviously you grew, by the time you're old enough to talk and have, start formulating memories, do you have any memory of hearing about him at all, or was it just all pictures and stuff?
No, like you said, by the time I was old enough to understand or talk and articulate anything, the events themselves had long since settled. It wasn't a topic of conversation anymore type thing. And I honestly don't recall ever hearing anything about it until I was probably a young adult, really. I mean, I don't recall anything about it other than just the story that
Just
Grandpa
the
shot
story.
himself in front of city council.
Right.
That's all I knew.
So, for the sake of, the conversation, at least from the perspective of Eric and I, it should be noted that not only did our mom's dad commit suicide, but so did our dad's dad years later. And I was a teenager. I think I was 13 at the time. So Eric, you would have been 8-ish, somewhere in there.
It was 1989.
1989.
So it would have been 7.
7. Yeah. So a unique family history on that regard. But I'm kind of interested in, because you're an adult, obviously, you've got 3 kids with the 4th one on the way, and your dad does this huge thing. Now, just to get clarity for people listening, Prescott is a small town. Prescott Valley was an even smaller town. And Prescott Valley was 8-ish miles away outside of Prescott, kind of through the hills, right? So being that Grandpa was somewhat known in the community, right, with who he was and whatnot, what kind of impact did his death have on the community? Obviously, it was in the news. It was all over the place. But did it have any kind of impact?
If it did, I was obviously, I mean, I have newspaper articles of people saying stuff that when he first did it, people would drive by the house, and the big house,
right,
and yell out the window, he should have done it sooner.
Wow.
They had already printed the daily newspaper. It was in print going.
Right.
And then they stopped it, and they reprinted the front page of my dad on a stretcher. And
which seems a very odd front page picture. Because I've seen that picture.
And it being on the broadcast on the radio we called the radio station and said, why did you broadcast his name? Because people die. They said it was happened in a public place that made it public knowledge. But people die on the highway every day.
Right.
And they don't release names till their family's been notified.
Yeah.
This was because people knew him.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah.
That's why it was released.
I was a traumatizing time in my life. I remember writing a letter to the editor trying to defend.
So he was bad.
Great. Yeah. Yes. Definitely.
Did anyone come to his defense? Besides family?
I don't remember. Like I said, it was a traumatizing experience. Right. And so those kind of details, I can't. I mean, 700 people came to his funeral.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. 700 people?
Obviously, there were people that loved and respected him.
Right.
For sure.
I mean, it's easy to maybe glorify things in retrospect, but I mean, legitimately, because I didn't really ever hear this before, or maybe didn't really put 2 and 2 together. But I mean, do you think legitimately at the time of his, participating in the city council and then being this thorn in the side of the city, I mean, legitimately, was he viewed by some people as kind of sticking up for the little guy?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this was a reputation that he had before this took place.
Yes.
So it wasn't like he was just this crazy old guy.
Yeah. And I probably should have prefaced all this. It just came to me, because I'm old. My dad was the city's humane officer, dog catcher, whatever you want to call it, for years when I was growing up. And that's probably where his desire and involvement sort of started.
And probably where he saw a lot of things that he thought could be different.
Yeah.
Because he was somewhat involved. He was a municipal employee.
Yes.
Essentially.
Exactly.
I have a vague recollection of that, but he was basically a dog catcher or an animal control, what we call now animal control.
Yeah. We call them humane officers.
Humane
you know.
officers.
And I remember, my brothers getting in fights with kids because, we were always a dog catcher's kid. That's not a very popular thing to be.
Right, right. Man, that's crazy. So what do you have any, like, how did Grandma take it? I mean, obviously she was probably devastated.
You know what?
But did she ever talk about it?
She took it a whole lot better than I.
Did she know? Did she have an inclination of where things were going?
I don't know. I really don't know.
I get the sense that she's never really, and she's passed now, but she never really opened up about it.
No.
And
I mean, she took 3 weeks off from work and then went back to work, and I'm sure she mourned, and I'm sure it was horrible, but my relationship with her wasn't
right.
amazing, and so I was probably more caught up in my own
Right.
sadness and grief and getting ready to have a baby, that I probably didn't focus on what she was going through. But I'm sure she mourned, and I'm sure she had her grief, but when I look back, I think that she handled it really well.
Well, she handled it in kind of like someone from her generation would.
Yeah,
because
you
the thing
just
is,
pick up and you go on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
with him being a public figure, and it sounds like some of the stuff that was thrown that direction, negative stuff.
But my mom never liked that public attention
Right.
that it brought to our family.
Right. And she probably obviously shied away from it
Yeah.
because she was working for the museum at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other thing, is she was, I mean, that was a state museum or a city museum,
State.
right? State
Yeah.
museum. So technically she was a government employee as
Yeah.
well.
Oh no, she was. Yeah.
So, I mean, she was involved in that as well. At the Charlotte Hall Museum is what it was called, correct?
She was an archivist down there.
Right. That's the dog in the background making all kinds of annoying noises. So here's what is interesting. And Eric, you weren't there, but your brother was a photographer, media guy,
Correct.
to some degree. So he at one point took a picture of me, Jenny, and Jason in a bathtub. And
In the old clawfoot bathtub in my mom and dad's house.
right. And that picture was hung in City Hall for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
Correct.
Did it hang in City Hall after Grandpa's death?
Yeah.
Was it there before he died?
I don't know.
You don't know.
Mm-mm.
How did it get put in there?
I don't know that either. Sorry.
Okay, so, but it was hung in City Hall as a picture that your brother took, and as far as a family photo goes, is fairly, on the family perspective, iconic that way. But
Oh, very iconic.
I don't remember the year, but we were in Arizona for a family reunion. I want to say it was 2000, and
Layla was probably.
she was 4 or 5, right?
Was she that old?
Yeah, I think she was that old at the time. Do you remember, Eric? You had just gotten married. I don't think you...
Yeah, it was 2006 or 7, I think.
Okay.
So, anyway, we're back in Arizona for the 4th of July
Right.
family reunion.
Yeah.
4th of July in Prescott was always, at least growing up, was a big deal.
Correct.
You know, because it's a very iconic small town courthouse area.
It's also the home of the world's oldest rodeo,
and
so
all
there's
that.
a lot of,
history tied to
Yeah.
it. But I got a chance to go into
City Hall.
the City Hall building. I got a good chance to go into the room where he shot himself, and it was super surreal to go in there, to kind of lean into that room. In fact, you wouldn't go in the room, if I remember correctly. Had you ever been in that room?
Never been in that room.
So yeah, it was a pretty surreal. And I think you told me that from that event they started
That's right.
recording video.
Yeah, and that also instigated the no firearms in the building.
So was this? But this wasn't something he was just holstered on his belt, right?
No.
Your dad didn't walk around with a
he did
gun.
not. I didn't even know he had one.
Right. So anyway, I got to go in that room where that took place, and it was obviously, with family history and stuff, it was fairly a palatable experience to kind of, and I'm sure the room has changed quite a bit over the years and it's been remodeled and all that good stuff. But it was I don't know, for me, because I was close to him as a kid. It was pretty palatable, when I went into that room. So I don't know. It's fascinating, and I know that all your siblings probably have a different perspective of it.
I'm sure they do.
I think that your one of your brothers, in some form or fashion, in one weird way or another, at least in my perspective, took up your dad's cause in some way, shape, or form when it came to the city, right?
Correct.
I mean, he probably got fairly aggressive at some of the, I would assume, knowing him, at some of the anti-Gus Patrick crap that was coming out.
That's right.
During the time. They came immediately to home, I would imagine, from Utah.
They did. We drove that night. Dad and I drove to Phoenix.
Right.
Which was torturous.
The night that he died.
The night that he died. And friends of ours who'd moved from Prescott Valley down there met me and Dad at the airport. And sat with us while we waited for my mom. And I think Keith and Herb, and then Jolene and my little brother drove home from Utah. So we picked my mom and either Herb and Keith or just Keith, and the rest of them drove home. And then, we did all the preparations and
all that from there.
Yeah.
I don't remember the funeral at all.
You weren't there.
I wasn't?
No, it was just, things are so different in today's world. I wasn't in any mental state to be looking after 3 little kids.
Right.
So you stayed home with the babysitter.
And that they had.
Plus, it just seemed,
Right.
Maybe you would have understood. I'm not sure about.
Yeah.
I mean, Jason was 2.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I think that I don't know. Obviously it's a crazy story, to say that your grandfather or your dad, committed suicide in a public forum. It's almost like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
And I wonder this. I cannot, for the life of me, and maybe I can't remember the name of this individual, but there was I saw a movie that was based on a true story of a female newscaster who shot herself live on TV in the Midwest somewhere in the late 70s, early 80s.
I don't know the name, but I do remember the story.
Yeah, and when I saw that, I wonder. Very unique story. People thought it was a prank.
Mm-hmm.
Because she was known to be a little bit of a troublemaker with the stories that she wanted to do and stuff. Anyway, I saw that, and it's probably not relevant, but I always wondered, how the idea came about. I mean, did he speak in his letters to you guys to that, to the reason why?
In my letter, he just said he was tired.
Right.
And he was tired of the way he was being treated.
Right.
How old was he?
56.
Right. Which isn't very old.
No.
No.
Not at all.
It's young.
No. Young.
Yeah.
But you think of him as an old man.
Yeah, you do.
When it took place. And now, I mean, because you're older than that. Right?
Yeah.
We won't tell the listeners how much older. But so you were, I mean, you've lived longer than your father.
I was 26 when that happened.
26 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Were you angry at all that you were the one here?
Yeah.
Or there?
Yeah.
That you were, and he knew that you would be the one that would.
He said that in the letter.
Right.
He said, "I'm sorry you have to carry the brunt of it going in."
but his exit was more important
I guess.
than that, which probably wasn't.
And that therein is also part of the how can you be thinking right when you're going to leave these people behind that love you unconditionally.
Right.
How can you not think clearly enough to think what you're doing, how it will affect them?
Well, there probably was some question because he could have done it 4 months later. He could have done it any number of times.
He had planned it.
I know he'd planned it.
No, when we went through all of his stuff, we found paperwork, letters that he had actually planned to do it the year before he did it.
He planned it a whole year in advance.
No, he was going to do it.
Oh, he was going to do it a year before.
And didn't. Something stopped him from doing it. I don't know what, but we found letters where he'd written the notes about doing it.
Right.
And didn't carry through.
Do you think that he had, was there some question in your mind, or was there some anger in your mind that you had a son on the way, his grandson, and that he did this months before?
Of course.
And wondered maybe why he didn't stick around a little bit longer to see his fourth grandchild?
Yeah, because he just loved you guys so much. He was just...
Right.
He was enthralled with you, obviously being the first.
Well, because I'm cool.
Well, that's where her affinity for you comes from then. That explains
Eric
a lot.
was obviously a joyous event.
Well, that was...
Given the circumstances.
2 months later?
Yep.
It
was even,
if it was on the 27th, and I was born on August 23rd, so just under 2 months.
Yep.
Wow. And, I always grew up not feeling cheated, but, not ever getting a chance to know Grandpa.
Oh, well, for sure. And that's...
And with other Grandpa being so young when he died, too, never really having a connection with a Grandpa that way.
It's, that was obviously where the anger came in, is that how dare you take yourself away from... all of this,
Yeah. He must have just gotten, like he said in the letters, he just got to that point of no return and being so tired, and probably, living with it mentally, and not having an expression, not having an outlet.
I think that was a big, big, big part of it.
It got to him.
Yep.
Did it take you a lot of years to come to a resolution about it?
Oh yeah, because I remember the first year anniversary. Our church had a booth on the plaza during the 4th of July, because this is all big business, and and we had this little booth, and I think we sold some kind of bread, for fresh baked bread, slices with butter and honey and all that. Dad was partially in charge of that, but we went out of town because it was just too fresh for me, and somebody got mad at him
at our
dad for taking me away and not being there for that. But it took me many years to. I have to say. I used to fly the flag every year on the anniversary of his death. And the last few years, I have to say that the time I think about it when the time rolls around, obviously, because it's right near the 4th of July.
Right.
And so I think about it, but I don't fly the flag purposely for that anymore. And it goes by unnoticed most of the time now.
Yeah, I think that's it's the whole story is really interesting, and we've heard bits and pieces of it. Obviously, I know more than you know, Eric, but there was a lot about in what you said that I didn't know.
No, I learned a ton today.
Yeah, so I think that about covers it. We could probably go on forever about, the different aspects of it and stuff, but it's just a real interesting story. And I hope at some point, later on we can, Eric and I will be able to dive in a little bit more about, at least for me, what his death kind of, sparked in me later on as an adult, and an interest that I took up. But thanks for coming on the podcast. I know it probably wasn't the easiest thing to kind of recount that on this for other people to hear, but I think that there's probably a lot of people, even in our immediate family, that has never heard aspects of this story as well.
That's true.
So thanks for coming on, and
you're welcome.
We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.